Well, good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Eduardo.
How are you this morning?
I'm good. It's a little chilly here in Mexico.
Well, it's very cold in Boston. I think it's below 20 degrees here.
Wow. Wow.
Well, listen, this is our third time getting together to have a discussion. Hundreds of people have watched our videos, your video primarily, my interviewing you, talking with you. And so I've had a lot of responses from people and very positive, and that's why I wanted to have another session with you sooner than later to keep it active in our time together.
Happy to do so.
Good. So before we go back, I wanted to jump back into where we left off. But before I do that, I wanted to give people an idea of what work you are currently involved with. Now, we've spoken a little bit about your Ayurvedic work and your sessions with people, and you've been doing that for over 15 years. But your writing and what you have on your website, petermalakoff.com, is quite extensive. But I just wanted to touch on a few things that you're presently working on. And one of them, and I may mispronounce it, it's Matsya Nyaya, which is the story of the fishes.
Matsya Nyaya. You've heard the term law of the jungle?
Law of the jungle, yes.
In the West? You know, the big animal eats the smaller animal. Right. That came out of the Sanskrit term Matsya Nyaya. Matsya is fish. Like the first avatar of Vishnu was the Matsya avatar, the fish avatar. And so Matsya is fish and Nyaya is law. So Matsya Nyaya means the law of the fishes. The big fish eats the smaller fish. And it came about when I was up in Manali, old Manali, and where we lived in the Himalayas. And I was reading in a book, and they talked about how if it was not for Dharma, it was in the Mahabharata, if it was not for Dharma, then just chaos would pervade the world. And that's the importance of they were talking about Dharma in terms of law and also the function of law to create a lawful society, a society full of law where people obey or adhere or try to adhere to Dharma. And the book Mahabharata was saying that the nature of man is animal-like. The nature of man is not some angelic being that's been covered over by, you know, sinfulness or things like that. The nature of man is animal-like, which that's why I started to write the book. It was fascinating to me because I realized that having grown up in a liberal culture in Washington, D.C. with my parents like Mahatma Gandhi and Mother Teresa, you know, in terms of their characters, I realized that they were always fighting against people who are adharmic. And I despaired of ever being able to change people's psyche and behavior through argument or through protest. Right. Although I thought it was really necessary, beneficial, and righteous that they do so. And so that's what set me off, oriented more towards spiritual practice, and particularly TM originally. That I thought you could change people's consciousness of, you know, their orientation in life, their orientation towards Dharma through meditation.
And so this story that you're writing or working on now is from the story of the fishes, and it comes out of an Indian literature. And you're adapting it or putting it in your own term, your own words, your own story?
Well, there's a story about that.
Right.
The story is we lived in Manali, which is the changing of the term. It was Manolaya, the place of Manu. Manu is where we get the word man in Western culture, Western languages, mankind. And Manu was the firstborn being of this Yuga, you wanted me to talk about yugas.
Well, we will get into the yugas.
Well, wait a minute.
Okay, go.
Let me finish the story. This is a really good story because it's a great introduction to the yugas. It's a great introduction to Dharma. Manu was at the end of the last yuga, which was not a benign age. Manu was worshiping. He was a great man, worshiping the sun and worshiping the god by the river. And he would dip his hands into the river and hold it up to the sun and pray. And as he dipped his hands into the river and brought up a handful of water, in his hand was a little fish. And the little fish spoke to him and said, "Save me from the big fish." And so Manu took him out of and put him in a pot. And the fish got bigger, and he put him in a bigger pot, and a bigger pot, and bigger pot. Finally, Manu took him in a wagon down to the ocean and let this big, now big fish go. And the fish turned around and said, "Thank you for saving me from the big fish. By the way, I happen to be Lord Vishnu, the Matsya avatar. And there's going to be a huge flood, and the whole world is going to be submerged. It's called a pralaya. And everybody's going to die. I want you to get a boat. And in that boat, I want you to get your family and the Sapta Rishis, the great Rishis, the mind-born sons of Brahma, not born of a woman, but born of Brahma's mind. Put them in the boat with you, take seeds and a few animals and things like that. Put that all in the boat with you. And then when the great flood comes, your boat will float, and I will come back, and I will tow you. I'll pull the boat to where you can start civilization again." Ringing any bells with the story of Noah? Of course. This is where the story of Noah came from, but it gives a much better explanation of it. So the rains came, everybody came into the boat started to float. The big fish, now huge fish, the Matsya avatar came and tying the boat to a horn that came off the fish's head with the great Shesha. Whenever you see pictures of Krishna, he's reclining, not whenever, but in many pictures of Krishna, you see him reclining on a great snake, 1,000-headed snake. That's called Ananta, the never dissolved in the pralaya, in the dissolution of the ages. So tie the boat to my horn using Shesha, and I will tow you to where civilization can begin again. And the fish did so, and he towed him to Manulaya, the place of Manu, Manali, the only Manu temple in all of India. I just happened to wind up there. And because of my nature I want to understand the stories of most people didn't know that much about it, even though they lived there, or they couldn't communicate it to me. Right. So that's where the boat of Manu came to rest, and where all the 7 rishis established their ashrams in that area. Like right across the valley from where we live was Vashisht, one of the mind-born sons of Brahma. And that was and it was Manu who became the lawgiver, Nyaya, Matsya Nyaya, the law of the fishes. Well, here, saved by a fish. All civilization is saved by a fish, and Manu became the author of what is called the Dharma Shastras, or let's just call it the law for now. So that is the relationship between how I came to write the book, Matsya Nyaya, the Vedas, the Mahabharata, and our Yuga that we are presently in. This is the Yuga, the first born person, the first man in this Yuga is Manu, and he was the great lawgiver. Cool story, huh?
Okay, I mean, I could ask you a lot of questions about that.
Go ahead.
Throws a little Darwin in there, but I want to jump into some of the other things, and we'll get back to the topic of what it is. You've also working on a story for Ram Dass.
I've just finished a book, a Hanuman story for Ram Dass. I met Ram Dass at the invitation of your wife that I could come, and there was a small gathering in Larkspur, I think, and California. And he was in a wheelchair. He had had a stroke, but he was recovering, and unable to keep my mouth shut when I talk with him. I told him a story that I'd heard out of the oral tradition of India about Hanuman. And Ram Dass said, I had never heard that story before, and could I send it to him? Which I did so within a couple days. And then I recorded an audio, and it went viral on the internet amongst certain circles. And years later now, this is 15, I don't know, I'm terrible with dates, but many years later, this is now I don't know. I completely forgot what we were talking about.
Talking about a story for Ram Dass.
Hanuman story for Ram Dass. So that was the source, that was the birth, that was the genesis of this book. And it's 400 pages. It's got hyperlinks. It's got videos, which I created. It's got videos. It's got audio. It's an introduction to the whole Indian tradition by the consideration of a single story, this Hanuman story for Ram Dass. And it introduces you and leads you in, because when you want to tell a story in the Puranic or Indian Vedic tradition, they'll start out talking about the Rama, who was born of King Dhritarashtra. Now, King Dhritarashtra, and they'll go off for pages about King Dhritarashtra. They always tell one story by telling another story about it, just like a dictionary. You know, you want to look up a word, it's other words that will define it. And that's the importance and value of stories, because it gives you all this range to define a particular thing.
Well, I noticed that recently because I just redid a talk that Vivekananda did in New York City in 1896, and it was entitled "My Master," which was Ramakrishna. Well, I was excited to hear about Ramakrishna, but when I started working on the story, which is published in a pamphlet that I had to work on, you know, he started talking about many, many other things before he got, you know, on page 30, he started talking about a man and and then he finally then started to talk about the specific man. So it was just this long tail of preliminary information setting me up, as what you're referred to. It's a way of introducing. It's like having sex. It's not like bing, bang, bang. It's a
That's right.
Introduction.
That's right. It's a Gita.
Yeah.
It's a song.
Right.
And yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so you're also working on a man who created the Taj Mahal.
I'm just finishing that book. This is again out of the oral tradition of India, about who created the Taj Mahal and where did his or her inspiration come from? What is the root of that inspiration? I mean, it has similarities to other buildings in the Islamic Indian tradition. But this is a story about a man who comes into the court of Shah Jahan and says, you can show me anybody's hands and I will carve their image in stone. I don't have to see their face. I don't have to see their body. I just have to see their hands. And the deal is that the Shah will give him whatever woman in the court who, you know, if he picks out of a woman, out of this whole lineup of women, if you find a hand you think is really beautiful and you want to do, and you want to be your wife, pick her and I will give you her as wife. So that's the basis of the story. I don't want to give too much away about it.
Well, yeah, what I'm pointing to is how much you're doing and how much you're really involved with this world of literature and mythology and the Dharma, because behind it all is the Dharma. It's the Dharma.
Yes.
And it's not just the Dharma, it's the eternal Dharma. It's the eternal.
Sanatana Dharma is the term, yes, the eternal Dharma.
So behind it all sits what the real story is about, which is then gets into medicine, which you've got a course online about your work in Ayurveda. And you also have a course recently on Ayurveda and aging.
I gave that, you know, I'm retired now, Ed. I'm living in Ajijic, Mexico, which is, I think, one of the major retirement centers for the Canadians and Americans. in Mexico. It's on the shores of a 50-mile-long lake, the largest lake in Mexico. And they have on Sundays, they have this big sort of like TED Talk kind of thing every Sunday. And I've given 2 talks there. One was on introduction to Ayurveda. And the second one, because there's so many older people here, and older people are confronted with a unique environment elementally that Ayurveda addresses. And I taught a course, or gave a course and talk here on Ayurveda and aging. What to do. See, aging is assumed in the West that, oh, you get old, you get sick, you die. But Ayurveda says it doesn't have to be sickness and then death. It definitely, the body ages and it dies, but it can die like a flower. You know, it doesn't get all sick and it just dies. So we're programmed to die, but we're not necessarily programmed to suffer in physiological terms and die. And so there's a theme, a principle that runs through aging in terms of the elements, the 5 elements. And that theme is Vata, or the principle of air and ether, which gets predominant after a woman gets her last period, men as they age around the same time. So I've taught courses and teach on that as well.
And also you have classes on the Mahabharata, and also you have an evening with Kabir, because you've done an enormous amount of work. I love your website because the what you do with Kabir is just poetry in motion. It is just,
thank you.
I mean, I love it. I love it. So anybody, we could get into this all session here, but I want to go, but I want to point people to your website and also to the work that you're doing. So if people want to pursue some of the work and presentations and what it is that you're about, I would refer them again to your website, petermalakoff.com, and there they can see what you're doing and contact you, right?
And buy a book.
And buy a book.
Well, yeah, that's there's a Jewish joke. You know, this guy is praying to God every day. Oh God, Lord Yahweh, please, you know, let me win the lottery. Let me win the lottery day and night. This guy's praying. Months go by, years go by. He's praying. One day he's walking down the street and he hears a voice from heaven. Moshe, my God, you know, he says, Moshe, he says, oh God, he says, Moshe, do me a favor. He says, buy a ticket. So, you know, you have to do the work. The winds of grace, Maharishi's guru Brahmananda Saraswati used to say, the winds of grace are always blowing, but you have to put up your sails. And so I'm aware of the necessity for the sails and the presence of the grace.
Well, Adidas says the same thing in a different way. He says you have to respond to grace, and the emphasis is respond.
Yes, yes.
The grace is there,
yes.
But you have to respond. You have to.
Yes.
You're responsible. And one of the things that I want to talk about is that responsibility in many different ways, because there's moral, there's ethic, there's financial, there's all sorts, you know, Gandhi's 7 sins encapsulates so much of what it is that we're speaking about. But we ended the last talk about karmic nature, the nature of karma in one's life. And that is not different than the story of the fishes, or what you know, determinists have said for centuries upon centuries, that we are in a midst of chaos or order, whatever, however, but we are victims or recipients of a larger wave, of a larger cycle of phenomena that's really bringing us down the river. We have a boat, we have the oars, but really the river is taking us to where we are headed. And that
You're talking about the yugas.
We're talking about the yugas. We're talking about not just the yugas, we're talking about incarnation. We're talking about a different sense of time in than we have in the West. And the time in the West, we're scientific today, and we have the Big Bang, and it's going to go somewhere, and the universe is expanding. But, you know, there's a linear kind of sense of time, where in the larger sense of the Indian sense of time, there's cyclical, there's cycles, there's rounds and rounds and rounds of lifetimes. I mean, we're just beginning, you know, we go to heaven or go to purgatory or go to hell, wherever you're going to go. But there's none of this sense of a dimension upon dimensions or epics and yugas. You know, we go back in history this way straight.
Yeah, and only a few hundred years in the West. You're dealing, India is a culture that's thousands of years. When they, off the west coast of India in the Gulf of Cambay, they discovered the largest underwater city ever found, which is the remains of ancient Dwarka, they believe, which was the city of Lord Krishna, which was submerged around 10,000 years ago. Right. In around 200 feet of water. I mean, which actually is mentioned in the full Mahabharata, in that Krishna tells Arjuna, his friend and devotee, get everybody out of Dwarka. Krishna knows he's going to die. He's been, that's a whole other story. And he asks Arjuna to get everybody out of Dwarka. And as he does, it's only a paragraph or two in the Mahabharata, this vast book. But he looks back from the mountains as they start to go up, and they see the city being inundated by water, which this was all poo-pooed and dismissed by Westerners until they found this remains of this huge underwater city. It's in the Gulf of Cambay, and it's in the city of Dwarka. Both lineal and spiral or circular time exist. In the short term, everything is linear. In the long term, it is valuable to know the differences or the qualities of what we're surrounded with. If you go into the Arctic, you know, it's good to know, it might be good to bring a gun, because the animals have not heard about anything except Matsya Nyaya up there, you know, and your food up there. So it's good, different environments, different yugas require different dharmas. There is always the Sanatana Dharma. There is an eternal Dharma that is unchanging. And there's the ever-changing, both. And so for life on Earth to grow and to persist, we have to understand what's going on, how to make a garden, how to capture solar energy so we don't burn up all the fossil fuels on the Earth and kill ourselves. All sorts of things. So most scholars feel that we are in the Kali Yuga, which is the dark age. These yugas are determined astrophysically by the Vedic tradition says there's a grand center of the universe. And in that grand center of the universe, what we call our universe, you know, goes around it in a huge elliptical arc. And when it's closest to the center, the grand center, that's the time of purity and Satyuga, they call it. And then as it gets farther and farther away in this arc, it could go into what they call Dwarpa Yuga, Treta Yuga, and then the Dark Age, which most scholars feel that we are in now. Although there's a few, like Sri Yukteswar, who was the guru of Yogananda, Swami Paramahansa Yogananda, who feel that this is in the he doesn't feel it's the Kali Yuga. Excuse me, because I can't remember which one he said, and I don't want to misquote him. But anyway, he says that we're out of the Kali Yuga. Especially, he relates that to the discovery of electricity and wireless, and you know that we're getting into the subtler. But nevertheless, in the cycle of each yuga, there are many cycles. And no matter what the environment is, certain practices, orientations, directions, laws, a law can be found and adhered to And that has always been the orientation of spiritual practice in the midst of any and all yugas. In the recordings of the Puranas that go back into other yugas, Rama and Krishna. Rama was an incarnation out of the Treta Yuga. He was the avatar of the Treta Yuga. Krishna was the avatar of the, I think, Dwapara Yuga. I might be wrong on these. On this
no, but I mean, it's well known in other traditions that there's always in times of darkness, I think it's said or even in the second coming of Christ, there's always the Maitreya Buddha. There's always the next incarnation of the one who's going to bring the light into the world and show the world the way, right?
Yes. So the Kali Yuga, for me, having read about it, like in the Bhagavatam Purana, which was written by Veda Vyasa, and recited for the first time by Vyasa's son Shukadeva to Arjuna's son Parikshit at a big sacrifice. That is the text or the scripture or the Purana that Vyasa wrote when he felt unsatisfied after he had written the Mahabharata, this incredible book, because it didn't focus on bhakti and the Supreme Lord, Krishna for him at that time. And because it was not focused on bhakti, it was not focused on this great tradition that Adida talks about of Ishta Guru Bhakti Yoga, that the source of all the religious traditions, of all Dharma, is the Guru, the Adi Guru, the original Guru. And all religions came out of the mouth of a guru, even Buddha. He didn't function so much as a Buddha, as a transmitter, but he was a transmitter, and there's records of that. So that is the major source. And so Vyasa started to write the Bhagavatam Purana, the Purana of the Lord. And it focuses more around bhakti. And it's said in the Kali Yuga, they have a story that Narada, who's this wandering, mind-born, wandering great being who wanders through all the three worlds, the heavens, the hells, everywhere. And he usually causes trouble wherever he goes. That's he's known as doing that. And, but he comes upon a woman with her two sons. And the woman is young, and her two sons look very old. And she's on the Yamuna River. He comes to them and he says, "What's wrong, mother?" And she says, "My two sons, who are Vairag, renunciation, and what is it? His second son, knowledge, Vidya." I think that's what it is. No, it's not Vidya, it's Jnana. My two sons, Vairag, renunciation, and Jnana, knowledge. These are two practices that are typically taken up in India. Because of the Kali Yuga, my two sons have gotten old and are no longer functioning. And I went to Vrindavan, the place of Lord Krishna when he was young, this big center of Krishna consciousness. And they still were uncured. And so can you help me? Because you're known as a great being. And Narada recited to them the Bhagavatam Purana, and her two sons were once again revived. So in the age of Kali, wisdom, jnana, what's called jnana, and what's called vairag or renunciation, have become lifeless, almost dead, because bhakti is not alive. And when bhakti is not alive, the root source of both her sons, her children, jnana and vairag, become old and not clear, not fully expressed. And so that is a use of the concept of the Kali Yuga or the Yugas, because it was only in the Kali Yuga this happened. It became so low a culture, so decrepit, so people's perception of life and of truth and emotionally, spiritually, in every way, we're ruining our planet, we're burning up, it just goes on and on once I start talking about that. And so that is the nature of the Kali Yuga, relevant to the Indian tradition, and jnana, this way of knowledge, and vairag, or renunciation. Renunciation is seen as necessary, but renunciation is the result, as we talked of earlier, of jnana, and jnana is the result of bhakti. And this brings me to something we didn't talk about. Maharishi, I went to Jyotirmath up in the Himalayas, way high up, Uttarkashi. I was hired as a tour guide for an Australian group of women. And so I went up there and I got to see, where Maharishi slept outside his door. Maharishi didn't practice TM, as far as I know. Maharishi was Ishtaguru Bhakti Yoga. He had fallen in love, including the romantic, but he was in love with his guru. He was overwhelmed. He was swallowed up, by his guru. And he sought to breathe the breath of his guru. And that was his whole practice. That was it. He didn't, here, do this technique, do that technique. His guru did tell him, Brahmananda told him to go to college and get a degree in Vedic study. No, sorry, that's me. Get a degree in physics. He just told him to go to college, which served him well as he came to the West in his later years. But that was his practice. His practice was not jnana. His practice was not vairag as a practice. It was spontaneous, in the same way that a man falls in love with a woman, and it becomes spontaneous, that you're not out there, partying with a whole bunch of them. That becomes spontaneous, but not because of the law, because you've renounced other women, but because your love is overflowing, and you can't get enough out in the context of one relationship. So that's a story of the yugas, bhakti, jnana, vairag, and the tradition of the yugas. Fascinating story, huh?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could go on with a treatise on this. I want to bring it into Western historical time, because in 1893, an Indian saint or a wise person came to this country, Vivekananda, and it was said to be a turning point in the history of East and West wisdom. I mean, you can bring it to the Buddhists saying when the Tibetans came here in the 70s that the iron bird flies in the sky.
This was Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava predicted when the iron bird flies in the sky, the Dharma will come to the West and to the country of the Red Man. Yes.
And that was in the 7th century. So here we are. We have these prophecies. We have these people who seem to be able to see further than the eyes of most of us, right? There is some prophetic telling in the Akasha story of the universe. There seems to be a larger body of knowledge that is actually shaping us, although we don't fully see it in our limited way. And whether it be the people who are around Sarah, the actress Sarah Bernhardt, Tesla goes to see Vivekananda. He's trying to talk to Vivekananda about how prana and akasha and kalpas, and using Indian terms, because all of this is now coming out of the out of the Bhagavad Gita. Indian thought so this is a renaissance in the merging, if you will, and even the second renaissance could be said our time, when we were reintroduced because we abandoned or went beyond our Judeo-Christian background. So there seems to be a larger body of information coming into our consciousness because it's not originated, right? We don't make this up. I mean, you're not making up these stories, you're receiving these stories.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow you're a conduit. You know, as Tessa says, you know, material objects don't hold information. They carry information from the environment. And so what I'm pointing—
That's what I say. I'm an ass bearing a load of books.
Well, I know enough authors who have written books and all they say is that it has been downloaded. I have no idea how this came about, and I just wrote it down, whether you're a songwriter or a playwright or an author of a great volume of books. Most people talk about it just being given, if they're really true and honest about where this information comes from. So I guess what I wanted to see and talk about with you is this kind of otherworldly, but yet worldly, and also time dimension that we exist in. We're very limited in our sense of time in the West. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we lock ourselves into these kind of bits of information that we kind of always are bumping up against with death, really, the end of, like in the West, death is seen the end, the final word of your life, and you leave a legacy behind you, your children. And in the East, as you well saw on the waters of the Ganges in Benares, it's a whole different way in which you allow the next incarnation to be given over. It's, you know, I mean, there is sorrow and all of that. So
when they burn a body in Benares, I mean, that's where I hung out, was at Manikarnika Ghat, which is this, it's the most holy, sacred place, some people say, in Benares. It's where they've been burning bodies for thousands of years, continuously. And when a person is burned, you often see them, you know, if they have any money or anything, but somebody will put these papers into the fire, usually the eldest son. There's no woman there, it's only men, because men do the karma as a woman emotionally, and they don't want to hold the soul or the subtle body, the causal body, to the physical. So it's only men, but they put the astrology chart into the fire there, because that's done. That slice of the pie. So you wanted to talk about karma. Right. In the West, we have a very superficial understanding of karma. You know, it's cause and effect. I mean, a lot of people, yeah, law of karma, you know, it'll get you. But all karma is not the same. They divide it. They have a huge consideration that's very exacting and, for me, illuminating. There's a type of karma called prabdha karma. That's like the whole pie of your karma, everything, or my karma. That's the whole pie.
But you're speaking of subtle. These are subtle karmas. These are deep karmas in subtle dimensions.
Karma comes from the word action.
Right.
And so the law of karma that most people know is every action has a reaction. You know, I spoke the other day with a guy who got a thorn in his foot, and the other guy got a gold box. So these are previous actions, but previous actions don't all come to fruition at the same time. And so the particular, as the whole, let's just, for the idea of it, there's a whole pie of our karmas, and then a slice is taken, and that's the karmas for this lifetime. In other words, the whole thing is not taken, just a slice. And in that slice of karma, but that it doesn't end there. There are karmas that you are presently performing. The analogy they give is of a person who is shot an arrow. That's going to have an effect. Once you can't withdraw it once you've shot it, but you know that's going to have an effect. So a person who's shot an arrow, that's going. So it's our present karma, and then there's and its results, and then there's karmas. For instance, when they do a Jyotish, a Vedic astrology chart, there's karmas that are probably going to happen. You drive down a road at 90 miles an hour, you know, in a city, there's a good probability you're going to hit something. You know, somebody's going to, you're just going too fast. So that's a combination of the speed at which you are presently driving and the potentiality for hitting something or someone or going off the road. You have no control, or you have control only over the speed at which you are driving. But if you're driving at that speed, you don't have any control over, you know, how events will come together. So there's a combination of what you have control over and what is completely outside of your control. And that is the effect. So karma can be moderated. In other words, if I hit somebody over the head with a rock purposefully and with malice in another lifetime, and then I've regretted it, I've come to terms with it, I've tried to live a life in which I'm benign towards people, that rock, which I sent out as a letter in past lifetimes, could come back as a leaf falling off a tree that hits me on the head. It doesn't have to be. It will have an effect. Everything has an effect, but things can also be moderated. And regardless, I mean, what did Jesus do to get crucified? You know, did he like really screw up in a past lifetime? In other words, there's all sorts of karmas, and it's very, 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 very impossible to tell what is exactly going on, because there's also karmas of a country. There's karmas of the environment you live in. The Tibetan Buddhists have a great saying. They say, if you want to know a person's past, if you want to know what their past is like, look at their present. You know, this is with the eye of wisdom, look at their present. You have to be really subtle in its understanding. And if you want to know a person's future, look at their actions. If you want to know their past, look at their present. If you want to know their future, look at their actions. So the emphasis has always been on action, you know, karma in this life. The unique quality of the Indian tradition and the Vedic tradition is that it says definitely good actions will bring eventually good results. There's no, you know, discussion or dispute about that. But action alone cannot free one from ultimate suffering. The nature of life itself is suffering, the first noble truth of the Buddha. When we went up into Ladakh, we drove up over the Rotang Pass and these 17,000-foot passes and went up into Ladakh, where the first Buddhist monasteries were built in that area. Ladakh is an old part of Tibet, but it belongs to India now, so to speak. Belongs. And at the entrance to every single Buddhist monasteries, and these are really old monasteries, big, beautiful paintings all through everything is painted because people were literate. And so the stories were told with pictures and paintings and parables. And but when you walk into the front door of any monastery, on your right-hand side will be a picture of the wheel of life, which is, you know, shows all the different realms, the gods, men, hell realm, all the different stages of life. They have a pig and a crow and a snake grabbing each other's tails in the center, which is at the core. Ignorance, anger, greed is at the core of all the outer circles. And the whole wheel is held in the hands of time. That's the demon that you see that holds that whole wheel. And then up above the wheel on the right and the left are paintings of the Buddhas. Outside the wheel of cause and effect. We cannot get free of time. Ayurveda and aging. Time in Ayurveda is considered to be a disease. And it's a disease that there is no cure, but it can be palliated. It can be, I mean, you want to try drinking a lot and staying up late when you're 80 years old? We'll see. There are people who can do that. Yes. I mean, there's rare people with, it's called huge Agni. They can have huge fire. They can just burn up everything. There's people. But for the vast majority, the vast, vast, vast majority of people, they can't do that. And they have to pay more respect to the laws of time, aging, and things like that. And so action does not free anyone from the grasp of time. Only realization, whatever the heck that is. But I mean, the whole transcendental aspect of the Indian tradition is focused on that. That's the same in the Buddhist tradition. That's the transcendent. In other words, something that is outside the realm of time, outside the realm of karma. That's why the Bhakti tradition became so big. Guys looked around and said, there's no action you can do. And they saw people do incredible stuff. The asceticism of the Buddha. He was surrounded by people who did incredible ascetics.
Well, let me just bring another concept in here. Maya.
Maya means literally that which is not.
Right. So basically what I'm referring to, what I want to get to, when you're speaking about karma and these kinds of time limitations, and I think Aldous Huxley wrote a book called Time Must Have a Stop in 1939, that the dimensions that we are locked into, which would be the karmic kinds of situation that you're referring to. There's also in the Buddhist lexicon is upaya, skillful means, where you're not in this dimension locked in time, because time in the concept from the Buddhist point of view and other schools of Indian thought and Japanese thought, Chinese thought, Southeastern thought, there's a transcendental nature that is actually prior or beyond and running through this period of Maya or limitation or illusion, right? So we're all referring to the reflections on the wall. We're referring to the mental and the physical and the emotional and all the things that lock us into the story of Manu or people, history, mankind, all of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a transcendental nature that is actually, this is occurring in the eternal Dharma. There's something to awaken to, right?
Which is not different than what is, always and already.
But
in other words, be careful.
Let me just say something, is that that is in the transcendental, but not of it. It's not in it. Like, this is not divorced from the eternal. The divine nature is radiant and all pervading. If we lock ourselves in through mind forms and what other subtle levels they exist in, there will be the separation between the eternal and the temporal.
See, but you're using the active verb "lock ourselves in."
Yes, absolutely. Lock ourselves in.
What attracted me to Adida. You see, he says, you're not locking yourself. I mean, this is my impression when I first read his Method of the Siddhas. You're not locking yourself in. It's like, it's not so much it's what you're preventing or pushing out.
Same thing.
Same thing, but a different emphasis, because there's no. I mean, now this is just pure philosophy for me. So I don't. But I know
we could make a story out of it.
Okay, well, I will. Okay,
it's your life, my life. Tell me your story.
So
I'll tell you my story.
So again and again in the Indian tradition, there are stories that break all the logical cause and effect boundaries of things. Again and again and again and again, you see that story. And so it's not that the transcendental is a realm, and this is another realm. I feel it's important to clarify this in the light of the Indian tradition as I understand it.
Right.
It's not that the transcendental is one realm and this is another realm. There's nothing but that. It's called the Mahavakias in the Upanishads. It means the Mahavakias, these great utterances. Vak is speech. Maha is great. These great utterances. I am that, thou art that, all this is that, ain't nothing but that. Those are the four. They don't use the word ain't though. But so those are the four great utterances. And they refer to different levels of realization. In other words, it's not just all or nothing. The principle that was put forward in the Indian tradition by Shankara was a principle called adhikarbheda. It means the qualification of the aspirant. Remember I told that?
But I don't want to get into dharmic kinds of things. I want to talk about the limitations that the Western mind that I exist in anyway, in the Boston area here in 2022, and the time that I'm living in, which is not the 1955 world of Walt Disney I grew up in, or I was told was the nature of the world. There were bombs that I had to duck and cover in the hallway of my gymnasium, but the only real threat was the atomic bomb. But now in 2020, I have lots of things to worry about: the quality of water, the quality of air, the madness of the pandemic. I don't know what to believe. I don't know. The chaos seems to be growing and growing and growing. It doesn't seem to be settling and settling and settling. In the midst of all of that, all of this great wisdom that we're speaking about has been coming in to the Western mind of what's over here in Harvard and what's over here in Cambridge. And now physics is now melding into this Eastern mysticism that has a lot of grounding to it, but is so far beyond the physical nature of what the Western mindset is about, right? So what I would like to discuss more is the time that we are and how the East can really clarify some of these ancient archaic mindsets that we have of what we're currently living under, the ancient. I mean, if you're still believing that the world was created in 7 or 8 days or whatever it was.
6 days, the seventh day he rested.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that we need to have a discussion about that a little bit, not to say it's wrong, but it might be a story, it might be a metaphor, it might be something, but we're locked in today into a battle where the East has this kind of acceptance. You know, Jesus was an enlightened avatar. And so is Upasani Baba, and so is Shirdi Sai Baba, and so is Mero Baba, so is this Baba, so is that Baba. There seems to be such a openness instead of a closed.
Looked at from here, in having lived in India for many years, it is deeper in their culture. But also, you know, for instance, in the partition between India and Pakistan, millions of people were killed, millions, in a very short period of time.
In Kashmir, yeah.
Well, in the cross migration of Indians flooding out of Pakistan coming into India.
Oh, during the
partition.
Yeah, the partition between, and how the hell are you going to have it on both sides of a continent or peninsula?
My own reaction to this state is to retire and to write and to teach. But I taught TM for many years in the United States. And most people were just taking up TM to have a better life. And Maharishi put it forth. Nothing wrong with that. Very, very few people understand this differentiation between salvation of self and liberation from self. And they're diametrically opposed in terms of the understanding of religion, what practice is, what it consists of, how you should orient one way or another, how you should understand yourself.
Well, maybe because I'm looking at the time, we could end this discussion with that, and in our next discussion, pick up where you just left off and I interrupted you.
No, man, I like when the conversation goes to more, it can go anywhere.
I understand. You are a storyteller. You want to talk about the stories.
You know, parables have been the best way of expressing life. And they touch levels of preparation. They touch the adhikarbheda of most people. And I am not a realizer, so, you know, I don't feel comfortable. I know I've studied the field, and, you know, I know a lot of the technicalities of the Brahma Sutras, this and that. I've been with great teachers. But I like to keep it simple.
Okay.
I like to keep it simple. And only every once in a while will we trip into the transcendent, where we don't know what the hell we're talking about. So that's how I like to keep it, but that's okay. You can ask me anything.
Well, I will direct people to your website.
Thank you.
I will point them to what you're writing about. I will point to them to what you're presenting. And if they wish to continue on with having the stories told, then I will gladly point them to you and you can continue on with the stories. But for us, I think we could still come up with some things to talk about that do have a story, and it is a story of mankind in today's world, or womankind in today's world of 2022 now. And I think there are some things to talk about.
There's a famous poet, she was a woman, she said, the universe is not made of atoms, it's made of stories. So thank you for the chance to talk, Ed. I appreciate it.
All right, we'll continue.
Okay.